So I was always speaking out, speaking up, and surprising others. When I started out in the first grade, because I always did things that were unexpected. I had learned to read when I was 4. And so I was always speaking out, speaking up, and surprising others. And from an early age, I would also be just a little bit off kilter and funny, sometimes trying intentionally, and other times, well, it just happens. I was a wild little outdoors playing thing. And one day when I was 7, I fell off my bicycle and landed on a piece of glass, which got stuck in my knee. So not wanting to admit or confess, I pulled it out and hid that from my parents for about 2 weeks until it turned green. And then they made me go to the hospital, and there was all types of peroxide, which was fascinating watching that stuff bubble up. And, and so I was quickly reminded that if there was something I had done that caused an injury, I really did need to share that information, which still didn't always occur after that. So I have fallen off barn roofs, never seriously hurting myself or others, I may add, and no farm animals were ever harmed in any of these escapades. But I was always outside getting into little scrapes and finding my way back out again to a troublemaker. Struggle is nothing more than a means of finding your way out, and how you're going to do it, how you develop that determination, and then find that way. When I was in college, they passed the Freedom of Information Act, and you could go look at your records. This was before having to submit requests, or they had developed procedures. So you could go to the dean's office and he would hand you the paper file and then tiptoe back out and hope you didn't see anything you would question him about. So I got that file and I looked at it, dean's list, and there's the letter from my high school guidance counselor. And it said, I don't recommend Mary for any college to accept her. She isn't intelligent enough to complete it. So it just absolutely threw me. I could recall having a difficult time with admissions. The admissions counselor had made me promise I would study hard and do well. And I didn't know at the time what that was. So when the dean came back in, I showed him that letter, and he wrote a letter to the high school. So I have told that story in numbers of occasions and situations since, including when I was selected for the Hall of Fame at my high school, and told that. And I was amazed at how many people came up to me afterwards and said the same thing happened to me. I don't think in some ways this is an unusual situation where you were judged at a young age and told you'll never become. You don't have what it takes. You're not good enough. But what that did in me was light a fire that became, I'll show you. Later it becomes, I want to do this for its own sake. But even if the spark that lights it is, oh, really? I will show you. That's fine. There's so many people I find inspirational. But most recently, I've been truly inspired by reading stories about what women did in World War II. Now, certainly there have been people who've served this country, who've made sacrifices, who've done exceptional or outstanding things and taken risks before. But at that time, women coming of age in the early 1940s were born right after women got the vote in this country. So they had an expectation things would be a little different as they grew up, that they would have more opportunities. And when for some of them that didn't occur, they found a way to do something different, to take on a new job, maybe even join the Women's Army Corps, who knew what that was, and see what they could do. So I think that reading about many of them, and people have said to me, well, how could they have done such things? And because when you start, you don't know what risks you're taking or what it means. You know what you face that day, and you know you can meet it. And so you take that step. And for many of them, it became one more step, until resistance fighters, they were in so deeply, they were committed. Or if they joined the Army, suddenly they're on a transport ship heading to the UK and dodging torpedoes at night. Or they've signed up to be a nurse and they find themselves in a combat zone where they have to roll the patients out of the cots and then lay on them when they're being shelled. They never anticipated any of that. But every single one of them that I have read about met the moment and did what they could. And that's the generation that would say later, oh, I didn't do that much. I just did my part. Don't pay attention to me. I don't need an award. I don't need anything special. But I think it is special, and it's important to remember and to tell that story because they influenced their children, their grandchildren. They built legacies. The woman I mentioned who was the nurse, I said, did you ever tell your kids what you did? And she said, they didn't ask. They didn't ask. So I think it's important to share these stories about those who have come before us. And I don't think of many of the people I've read about as being old ladies. Okay. I think of them as 17, 18 going, yeah, I can do that. Sure. I can be a flight nurse and fly in one of those planes that are held together with gum and wire and canvas. I can do that. I've seen some of those planes. They couldn't make me get in one just to look at it in the museum. I came into the Army because I had friends who did that after college and were enjoying the challenges, the travel, having new experiences. And I thought, well, I could do that for a couple of years and then move on to other things. I could do that. And so I decided I would stay for 3 years. I stayed for 5. And this was the early 1980s. So it was not a pleasant time in the military. There were issues after Vietnam. There was drug use. There were leadership problems. And I left the active Army and I started to work in public relations, but I stayed in the reserves. I loved the reserves. I loved it because I got to meet amazing, incredible, average people from all over. And when you meet people in different situations, it's not like you meet somebody in the grocery store and they're going to tell you about their life. But when you are together for a weekend doing the same things, you talk. I got to learn so much about so many places. I got to travel. I got to challenge myself. I quickly decided that this is a big competition at the lower levels. How do I rise above? How do I appear differently? How do I challenge myself? And I decided the one thing I would do would be speak. So I would talk about communications. So the first time I did this was at a conference. They had mic'd me up. I'm backstage. I'm looking out into the dark and I see 200 some people out there and I am terrified. I didn't know the microphone is live and you could hear me backstage going. They finally had to shut it off and let me start over. But after I did it that first time, I was like, I can do this. I can do this. I still sign up to do speaking engagements of different types. And the day before I'll be, whose idea was this? Well, it was yours. You're going to go do it. So that was one of the things I did, which led me to teach media relations to commanders. And when I was up for a job to work in Germany at an international school that teaches defense to the former Soviet republics, I was selected. And then I taught media relations there. I ran conferences in Croatia and Russia. I taught at the NATO school. And for 11 years, I taught in Sweden, speaking to the Scandinavian countries and the Baltics. So I have had incredible experiences by opening one door, by trying one thing. And that whatever that one thing is, that's what I recommend doing. Don't stop yourself before you get started. Don't prejudge that you can't. Prejudge that you will. Prejudge that you're going to be successful. Prejudge yourself kindly and give yourself every opportunity to make it, because your first judgment is the one that matters. You listen to your voice. No one else can tell you what you are or who you're going to be. That high school guidance counselor couldn't stop me. Nobody can stop you from doing what you want, being who you want, and being successful. Just do it. Be a troublemaker every day in one way or another. How significant I think it is to have a sense of humor. I meet too many people who are mightily impressed with themselves and where they have gotten to in life, and they're very huffy about that, and they can't be seen enjoying anything. And I enjoy everything. Some of this is how we tend to compartmentalize, where you behave one way with your friends, another with your family, and another at work. And it's a conscious decision, I think, to decide I am one person and I am like this all the time. So I do display a sense of humor. I make fun of myself. I never make fun of others or of situations. I can be tempted. And I can give you a story about one instance that worked, because even though I've talked about judgment, how we judge ourselves or others judge us, we're always going to be judged. And I think there is an awareness about that that is important to acknowledge. In my last assignment in the Army, I was in charge of a unit of attorneys. I had 1,785 attorneys in this organization. And they invited me to speak at their CLE conferences, continuing legal education, and talk about ethics. Very obviously, I am not one of them. And this is a group that is very much about us, as well it should be. So one of our conferences was held in Chicago. This was before Comic-Con moved to San Diego. I didn't know what Comic-Con was. They had to tell me. And I said, okay. So we're in the hotel and I'm watching people in strange costumes go by. Very interesting. Conference begins the next morning at 7:30. I am up, I'm in the glass elevator as it's coming down, and Batman gets in with me. Now he looks at me, I look at him, and there's that moment when you can tell what the other person's thinking, and we're both thinking the same thing. Is that a costume? So we get a little lower. He sees all of the soldiers there in their uniforms, looks back at me and says, "Thank you for your service." And I said, "Batman, thank you for your support." Now, I told this story at the beginning of that conference because what I'm saying to them is, I know you would judge me, and I'm telling you I'm aware of that. Now will you listen? And it worked. Everyone sits up, they're now listening, and I was able to speak with them. But I think you have to have that awareness. We all have it instinctively that, oh, this feels uncomfortable here. Let me call it out. Let me mention it in a way that is non-threatening, and we'll get it out of the way. And so I try to do that often. I got a lot of Batman dolls as gifts later. But it lets you say things that sometimes are difficult without being heavy with them. And I think it gets the point across easily and nobody gets hurt.